What if Africa's ancient spiritual systems, long overshadowed by Western religions, are not just surviving but thriving, reaching new generations and reshaping global spiritual movements? Could the future of African traditional spirituality hold the answers to some of the world's greatest spiritual crises? In the heart of Africa, spiritual systems that predate written history continue to thrive, deeply embedded in the lives of millions. African traditional spirituality, an intricate web of beliefs, rituals, and deities, has not only survived the most brutal of external forces, colonization, the slave trade, and the spread of monotheistic religions, but has also adapted and evolved. While much of the world turned away from indigenous practices, Africa's spiritual core remains steadfast, providing a blueprint for cultural identity, moral values, and a deep connection to the ancestral world. African spiritual beliefs vary across the continent, but a common thread runs through them all: a belief in the interconnectedness of humans, nature, and the divine. The gods and goddesses, spirits and ancestors aren't just abstract concepts. They are active participants in the daily lives of African people. They guide, protect, and punish. They influence agriculture, healing, and community life. This is why, even when faced with foreign forces that sought to erase these traditions, African spirituality did not fade, it adapted. The spread of Christianity and Islam across Africa brought with it the promise of salvation. Yet for many, these new religions were seen as foreign impositions. Throughout the colonial era, missionaries sought to convert the African population, preaching that African spiritual practices were heathen and savage. The imposition of Western ideologies, alongside the degradation of African cultural practices, was meant to sever the spiritual ties to the past. But it didn't work. Today, African traditional spirituality has become a symbol of resistance and survival. It stands as a testament to Africa's resilience in the face of centuries of cultural erasure. From the sacred groves of the Yoruba to the ancestral rites of the Akan, African spirituality remains strong in remote villages and even within urban centers, where young people are beginning to reclaim their heritage. The memory of these ancient practices lives on, not just in rural areas but within the global diaspora, connecting Africans to their ancestors in powerful ways. While African traditional spirituality remains vibrant, it's not merely a relic of the past. It has always been in flux, constantly adapting to the evolving world around it. Whether through the rise of Pan-African spiritual movements, the revival of ancestral worship, or the incorporation of modern technologies like social media and online communities, Africa's spiritual heritage is not merely surviving. It's growing, evolving, and shaping the global spiritual landscape.
A deep, atmospheric soundscape with gentle hums, low-frequency drones, and soft, mystical whispers.
African spirituality has long been a cornerstone of cultural identity on the continent, but its reach today extends far beyond Africa's borders, influencing spiritual practices worldwide. As the African diaspora spread across the globe due to slavery, migration, and colonization, the spiritual traditions of the continent traveled with them. These spiritual systems, once relegated to isolated communities, now resonate on a global scale, influencing everything from modern-day religious movements to popular culture.
The merging of realms, it should be meditative, creating a sense of calm, yet underlying suspense, as if an unseen presence is at work.
In the United States, African spiritual practices have shaped the foundation of movements like the civil rights and Black Power movements. Figures such as Marcus Garvey, Malcolm X, and even Beyoncé have invoked African spiritual symbols and philosophies in their quest for empowerment and liberation. African-inspired religions like Vodou, Santeria, and Candomblé, which blend indigenous African beliefs with elements of Christianity, continue to thrive in the Americas. These religions have not only survived centuries of oppression but have transformed, adapting to new social and political landscapes while keeping the essence of African spirituality intact. As the world becomes more interconnected, African spiritual practices are finding their place in the global spiritual marketplace. Yoga and meditation, while often associated with India, have been deeply influenced by African practices such as drumming, dance, and ancestral reverence. Many African spiritual rituals, like ancestor worship and offerings to deities, echo practices found in indigenous cultures across the globe, demonstrating a universal human need for connection to something larger than the self. Perhaps the most significant shift in the global influence of African spirituality is the digital revolution. Social media platforms, YouTube, and online forums have created a space for African spirituality to be explored, discussed, and celebrated by a new generation of global citizens. Online communities dedicated to African gods, ancestors, and spirituality have flourished, allowing individuals from all corners of the globe to reconnect with their African roots. These digital spaces are where traditional ceremonies, rituals, and wisdom are passed down, not just to African descendants but to anyone curious about the profound teachings of Africa's spiritual heritage. This digital age has allowed African spirituality to transcend geographic and cultural boundaries, uniting individuals in a shared interest in healing, empowerment, and connection to the divine. As African spirituality gains prominence in the global spiritual movement, it challenges the dominance of Western religious ideologies, offering a fresh, empowering alternative that emphasizes the importance of ancestors, nature, and the sacred in everyday life.
Gentle hums, low-frequency drones, and soft, mystical whispers. This background music should convey a sense of spiritual depth and the merging of realms. It should be meditative, creating a sense of calm.
In the future, African spirituality is poised to continue its global expansion. From Africa's vast spiritual traditions to the ways in which African-inspired movements are influencing religious and spiritual practices worldwide, one thing is clear. The spiritual wisdom of Africa is not only surviving but thriving in the modern world, creating new connections between cultures, faiths, and the divine. While African traditional spirituality continues to thrive in many parts of the world, it faces significant challenges in the modern era. The forces of globalization, modernization, and the dominance of Christianity and Islam in many African countries have created a complex environment for the preservation of indigenous spiritual practices. These challenges are not just external but also internal, as Africa's spiritual systems wrestle with the rapid pace of change, the influence of foreign religions, and the rising secularism in urban centers.
Ashes swirling toward the sky, echoes of the ancients calling through the night. The veil is falling, mysteries wrapped in the dark. The craft ignites the eternal spark.
One of the most pressing challenges for African spirituality is the widespread perception that it is outdated or inferior to major world religions. This stigma was deeply ingrained during the colonial period, when European missionaries deliberately undermined indigenous African religions, labeling them as primitive or heathen. This perception, though increasingly challenged today, still lingers, particularly in urban areas where Western religious ideologies hold sway. Many Africans, especially the younger generation, may view traditional spirituality as irrelevant or incompatible with modern life, preferring the promise of salvation offered by Christianity or Islam.
A bridge between the earth and the shell. The spirits watch, the spirits guide through unseen realms where truths reside. Echoes of the ancients call.
Moreover, the rise of secularism, alongside the growth of Western-style education systems, has led to a decline in the practice of traditional rituals. Urbanization has also led to a disconnect between younger generations and the land, nature, and ancestral sites that are central to many African spiritual practices. In the fast-paced modern world, the deep, contemplative rituals and reverence for ancestors are often viewed as time-consuming or old-fashioned. As a result, many African spiritual practices are at risk of being forgotten, especially in cities where life is rapidly changing.
The spirits watch, the spirits guide through unseen roads where truths reside. Over the ancients calling through the night, the veil is falling.
In response to these challenges, there have been concerted efforts to preserve and revitalize African traditional spirituality. Activists, spiritual leaders, and academics are working to reclaim the narrative surrounding indigenous spiritual practices, highlighting their relevance and importance in today's world. In countries like Nigeria, Ghana, and South Africa, initiatives have emerged to restore sacred sites, revive traditional festivals, and encourage the younger generation to reconnect with their ancestral roots. These movements emphasize the practical benefits of African spirituality, such as community cohesion, ecological sustainability, and holistic healing practices. Additionally, traditional spiritual leaders, known as priests, healers, and diviners are stepping into the digital age, using social media platforms to share knowledge, conduct virtual rituals, and reach a broader audience. This digital transformation is crucial for ensuring that African spirituality remains relevant to the global conversation about religion, culture, and identity. By adapting to modern technology, African spiritual leaders can counter the forces of secularism and Western religious domination, creating new spaces for the practice and appreciation of traditional African beliefs.
Rise from the ground, the drum speaks a language profound. A fire burns where secrets lie, ashes swirling toward the sky, echoes of the ancients calling through
Yet,
the night.
the struggle for recognition and preservation is far from over. As African spirituality continues to evolve, it faces new dilemmas, such as the commercialization of sacred practices and the risk of cultural appropriation by those outside the African continent. The challenge is not only to preserve these practices, but to ensure they are respected, valued, and practiced authentically, without being diluted or distorted for profit. Despite these challenges, the resilience of African spirituality is undeniable. Even in the face of adversity, it continues to adapt, evolve, and inspire. The path forward may not be easy, but the future of African traditional spirituality looks bright, as it finds new ways to navigate the complex terrain of modernity while holding on to its ancient roots.
The earth and the shell, the spirits watch, the spirits guide through unseen realms where truths reside. Echoes of the ancients calling through the
As the world moves further into the digital age, African traditional spirituality is experiencing a profound revival, especially among young Africans who are reconnecting with their cultural and spiritual roots. The future of African spirituality is no longer confined to the remote villages or sacred groves of the past. It is rapidly transforming, taking on new forms that blend the ancient with the modern, the traditional with the technological. One of the most powerful forces driving this revival is the growing sense of Pan-Africanism and cultural pride sweeping across the continent. For many, reconnecting with traditional African spirituality is an act of reclaiming their heritage and identity. It is a response to the historical trauma of colonization and the erasure of African cultures. In countries like Nigeria, Kenya, South Africa, and Ghana, younger generations are seeking out spiritual systems that resonate with their cultural experiences and offer alternatives to the imported religions that have dominated their societies for centuries. This shift has been further amplified by the power of social media and online platforms. Digital spaces have become essential tools for the resurgence of African spirituality. Social media platforms like YouTube, Instagram, and Facebook now serve as spaces where traditional spiritual leaders and practitioners can share their knowledge with a global audience. Virtual ceremonies, online rituals, and spiritual guidance are no longer limited to the physical realm but have crossed into the virtual world. This accessibility is making African spirituality more widespread and inclusive, allowing practitioners from across the globe to learn about African gods, ancestral worship, and healing traditions. Young people, who may not have grown up with direct exposure to African spirituality, are discovering these practices through online communities and resources. These digital spaces are fostering a new wave of spiritual exploration, where individuals of all backgrounds are eager to learn about African traditions and incorporate them into their own lives. This cultural exchange is not just about reclaiming lost heritage, but also about creating a global conversation around the value of African spirituality in a rapidly changing world. The African diaspora has also played a critical role in the revival of African spiritual traditions. For example, the Yoruba religion, Vodou, and Santeria, all of which emerged from African spiritual practices in the Americas, are now experiencing a resurgence, especially among young African descendants in the US and the Caribbean. These diasporic communities are not only reclaiming their spiritual identities, but are also leading movements to reintegrate African spirituality into mainstream discussions about religion and identity.
The earth and the shell. The spirits watch, the spirits guide through unseen realms where truths reside. Echoes of the ancients call.
In addition to these trends, African spirituality is increasingly influencing global spiritual movements, including those focused on environmental sustainability and holistic health. Many traditional African spiritual practices emphasize the sacredness of nature and the interconnectedness of all life, which aligns with contemporary global movements focused on environmental preservation and ecological balance. African spiritual teachings about living in harmony with the earth, respecting ancestors, and seeking balance between the spiritual and physical worlds are gaining new relevance in a world struggling with climate change and environmental degradation. Perhaps most importantly, African spirituality is finding its place in the broader spiritual landscape by offering an alternative to Western-centric religious ideologies. Its emphasis on community, nature, ancestors, and the divine provides a holistic and inclusive approach to spirituality that appeals to those seeking a deeper connection with themselves, their heritage, and the world around them. As more people around the world embrace the principles of African spirituality, it is poised to become a key player in the future of global spiritual practices, offering wisdom, healing, and insight that transcends borders and cultures. This evolution of African spirituality is not just about preserving the past. It is about actively engaging with the future. By reclaiming, adapting, and reinterpreting traditional practices, African spirituality is positioning itself to play a central role in the spiritual movements of tomorrow.
Secrets lie, ashes swirling toward the sky. Echoes of the ancients calling through the night. The veil is falling.
As we look toward the future, it is clear that African traditional spirituality is poised for a powerful renaissance. What was once considered a set of primitive beliefs is now being recognized worldwide for its depth, wisdom, and relevance. The spiritual systems that have sustained African cultures for centuries are now becoming beacons of hope, healing, and empowerment for individuals and communities around the globe. The return to these ancient practices is not just about nostalgia or a longing for the past. It's about reclaiming what was lost and reimagining it for the future. African spirituality is emerging as a force for change, offering new answers to the spiritual crises of the modern world. In a time when many seek deeper meaning, more authentic connections, and sustainable ways of living, African spirituality has much to offer. It emphasizes community, harmony with nature, and a sacred relationship with ancestors. all of which resonate with people seeking to reconnect with themselves and the world around them.
Echoes of the ancients calling. Through the night the veil is falling. Mysteries run.
As African spirituality continues to influence movements in the African diaspora and beyond, it is creating a new kind of global consciousness, one that celebrates diversity, inclusivity, and spiritual unity. The digital age has opened up unprecedented opportunities for people to explore African traditions, share their experiences, and deepen their understanding of ancient wisdom. Through social media, online courses, and digital platforms, the global conversation surrounding African spirituality is expanding, creating bridges between cultures and people who may never have had the chance to connect otherwise. This movement is not just a spiritual revival. It is a cultural reawakening. It invites us to rediscover and honor the sacred, the divine, and the profound wisdom embedded in the African worldview. By embracing the future of African traditional spirituality, we are acknowledging the power of ancestral knowledge and the vitality of indigenous cultures in shaping our global spiritual landscape. In the end, the future of African traditional spirituality is not just about preserving the past. It's about ensuring that these profound systems of thought continue to evolve, adapt, and guide future generations. As we reclaim our spiritual heritage and embrace the rich tapestry of African traditions, we are not just transforming the spiritual landscape of Africa, but of the entire world. If you've been moved by the power and beauty of African traditional spirituality, now is the time to share in this global conversation. Like this video, comment with your thoughts and experiences, and share it with those who are seeking spiritual depth and cultural connection. Let's keep this movement going. Don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell, so you never miss a moment of our journey through Africa's rich spiritual heritage. Together, we can continue to explore, preserve, and celebrate the ancient wisdom of African spirituality. Join us in this incredible journey. Your participation in this movement is just the beginning.